FanDuel's offering us a more flexible slate this week. We'll cover that briefly, but before we do, let's go to Vegas to see what the Vegas odds makers have in store for us this week. John, tell us, what is Vegas showing you this week in the DFS world?
3 double-digit home favorites. Always good for running back situations. This week, you've got the New Orleans Saints hosting the New York Jets. Those Saints, they have a couple running backs who have been pretty efficient this year in the form of Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. The big question is, which one do you want and why? Minnesota, they've got 2 running backs as well that you have to choose from. Latavius Murray, Jerick McKinnon. They host Cincinnati as 10.5-point favorites. And then Jacksonville is playing host to the Houston Texans as 11-point favorites. We know we're going to see plenty of Leonard Fournette in that case. All 3 of these teams, the running back situations are very good, but I would argue that the defensive situations are even better. That's going to be my defensive take for the week. Take one of those 3 defenses.
Oh my gosh, John talked about a defense or a kicker.
Intro.
In the intro, he's psyched. It's going to be a big show today. When I last looked at the Vegas lines, what struck me was just the giant disparity between the haves and the have-nots. You know, there's like 7 teams under 20 points implied total and like 8 over 24. It was big spreads. So it sounds like we got a lot of running back options this week. But before we get to running backs, let's talk about quarterbacks. Devin Knotts, tell me, who are you playing at quarterback this week?
Yeah, I think there's a couple guys. So I'll save some of the bigger names for some of the other guys that are softballs out there. But the guy that I'm starting with is Nick Foles against this Giants defense. So the Giants defense, I mean, putting it bluntly, is an absolute mess. So without Janoris Jenkins, they're without Eli Apple. Brandon Dixon is playing, who most people have never heard of. I certainly haven't. The Giants over the last 3 games have allowed 287 yards per game passing. They allowed 332 yards last week to Dak Prescott. Nick Foles, this is a situation where they're going to want to make sure that they run the entire playbook through him and basically give him a 3-game sample to get him ready for the playoffs. So Wentz isn't coming back. We know that. This isn't a game where he's just going to try and get accustomed to the offense. They're going to try and get him ready for the playoffs and have him run the entire packages. So Foles is one of my top guys. The other guy I really like this week is DeShone Kizer, actually. So we saw what Roethlisberger was able to do against the Ravens last week without Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith is a really good corner, and he's suspended. So this is a matchup where Kizer looked very, very good last week up until he decided he was DeShone Kizer, and ended up costing the team the game with two late interceptions. But his price is still relatively affordable. He threw 3 touchdowns last week, 71% completion percentage. I think this is and we'll get into stacks in a little bit, but DeShone Kizer for the first time I've recommended him back-to-back weeks.
I don't know what's happened to you in the second half of this season, Devin. You're recommending Browns just about every show.
Josh Gordon just adds so much to that offense. So it actually gives them a playmaker, and it takes Corey Coleman from the number 1 to the number 2. It's a much better team because of Josh Gordon.
Certainly more upside for sure, and the matchup is right. I mean, when one of your cornerbacks is sitting at home or tweeting about how healthy he is, that's not a good look.
I mean, they gave up 500 yards passing last week. If Kizer can have half of that, right, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Carson Wentz, who's obviously out. A few other guys that have some injury situations. It looks like Tyrod Taylor is going to be back this week versus Miami. Looks like Tom Savage is out, so we're going to get TJ Yates versus Jacksonville. We've got Josh McCown out with a hand injury, so we're going to see some Bryce Petty at New Orleans. And Aaron Rodgers returns at Carolina. Hey, Jeff, do you like
Can I ask you guys a question real quick?
Ask me a question.
So TJ Yates is a relatively known name.
Right.
Did you guys know he's only started 2 games since 2011 when he played those playoff games?
But he's the only Texan quarterback to ever win a playoff game? Is that the stat?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
But doesn't it seem – I mean, 2011 seems a long time ago. It doesn't seem like he's He's only started 2 games. His name comes up more frequently than not.
Yeah, I think there's always the possibility of a Yates sighting. And
He always comes in for injuries and
Yeah, he's like the Sasquatch of the NFL or something.
Start the Jags defense this week.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting our defensive takes out quick this week to make sure that, Jeff doesn't have anything to talk about later. Jeff, I'm going to pitch it to you to talk about your quarterbacks this week.
Well, let's clear the table of the softball. So I think everybody's looking at the New England-Pittsburgh game. So you got both Big Ben and Tom Brady. So those guys are out there. They're going to be very chalky, as is Russell Wilson. I mean, all the offense runs through Seattle. So those 3 guys are big. Aaron Rodgers, you mentioned him a moment ago. I think he's very playable this week. But I think the guy that's going to get overlooked is Cam Newton. And I think Cam Newton against the Green Bay secondary, he's got a very nice floor because he can run. He's been running a lot. I think that he's going to be a very good play, especially on DraftKings. The one quarterback I'm looking at in GPPs, though, is Jimmy Garoppolo. He's had almost 300 yards in 2 consecutive weeks. I think he was 1 yard short 2 weeks ago. But Tennessee's a terrible secondary, and him and Goodwin are really connecting a lot. I think that Garoppolo, his price is very favorable, and it's a good matchup. And a lot of people will be surprised that San Francisco actually favored over the Titans, but I'm not. I think that's going to be a pretty interesting game and could be relatively high scoring. I think the Tennessee probably tries to run the ball and slow down San Francisco. They're a very slow team, and San Francisco is a very fast team, so it'll be an interesting matchup.
Yeah. Are we paying up for Brady? I'm not. I mean, I'm not planning on it.
GPPs. I wouldn't. I would reach up for Wilson. I wouldn't go much higher.
If I'm going to pay up at quarterback, I'm going to go all the way to Tom Brady. The price difference between Wilson and Brady is only $300. And we've got one quarterback with a huge history of success against his opponent, Brady, and another with a pretty spotty history against his with Wilson. The last 2 times Wilson has faced the Rams, he's only had 14.1 and 14.5 fantasy points. And he had his 4th most recent game was under 20 fantasy points as well. So it's not a great history against that team. It's also the whole second time in the division narrative that has been, shown to limit production when the 2 teams face each other multiple times. So I'd rather just find the 300 and take Brady if I'm paying up. But as the cheap quarterback whisperer here with Devin, I'd almost rather play Foles or Kaiser and load up elsewhere on guys that have guaranteed touches.
Here's
what
my
about
take.
Aaron Rodgers?
Well, here's my take game strategy wise. If I'm playing in cash, I'd rather have Russell Wilson than Tom Brady. So I've got that figured out. If I'm going to GPPs, I think Tom Brady is going to be too highly owned for me to be excited about paying up for him. So I'm probably not going to have Tom Brady owned in either. Not that I have any beef with Brady or how he's played in the past. I don't like either situation for him this week.
He's got 500-yard upside in this game. I don't think I'm exaggerating.
He has 5 touchdown upside as well. Either or, if not both.
He looked really bad last week, though. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, he hasn't looked like Tom Brady. He's looked like a 40-year-old quarterback.
This might be super narrative street, but what is more likely? The Patriots show up flat for a game, wildly unprepared, looking ahead, or they don't want to show anything against a team that doesn't matter in a game that doesn't matter, because if they go beat Pittsburgh, they get the 1 seed anyways.
I'm not going to buy that. I'll buy the first one. They were looking past it on a game that really they didn't think they need to be prepared for, and they got their butts handed to them. And this week, if Belichick comes back prepared 2 weeks in a row, I will be astounded. You just look at the game logs. Go to my Footballguys and look at the game logs against this Pittsburgh secondary. Joe Flacco, Andy Dalton, Brett Hundley, Marcus Mariota, Jacoby Brissett, every one of those guys scored 20 fantasy points against this secondary. Brady is going to light them up. And then you've got this excellent Steelers defense that's going to keep the ball. It's going to go back and forth. I mean, I just don't see how this game doesn't score 50 points. You've got to have a piece of it.
Yeah, I'm going to look over at Buzzard's ownership percentages, and he's actually got Brady on DraftKings lower than I would have expected. He's got it at 7%, same as Aaron Rodgers. So if Brady's going to be that low, I'll have some exposure to him.
You can save $800 by going with Rodgers. I mean,
I like Rodgers too. I'll probably have more exposure to Rodgers than I will.
Green Bay has to win out, basically.
What are Jeff? What's your thoughts on the Rodgers? It looks like you had something on Rodgers.
On Rodgers, I'm always a little leery about a guy coming back from injury, but this guy's coming back. He's healthy already. He was healthy. He was ready to play last week. Only the IR status kept him from playing. I think that's going to be a shootout game because this Green Bay secondary can't stop anybody, and Cam Newton's going to have a good game. I like Aaron Rodgers getting exposure to Green Bay because I don't know what receivers to pick. Maybe Jordy Nelson. But I like Rodgers overall, but I see the argument for Tom Brady. The whole cash game of Wilson versus Brady. Wilson has all the touches, but Brady has such upside. I would much prefer Brady with the upside in GPPs against that Pittsburgh bad secondary, and that Brady's had 3+ touchdowns in 5 out of 13 games already this year. And you're getting Gronk back. And this is basically the game for the number 1 seed. So I think that's where I like the upside for Brady. I definitely see all these guys playable. I think Aaron Rodgers, he does need to win out. I think he's very solid. But the GPP guy, the bigger upside guy for me is Brady.
All right, that's a fair point. But for the cash game situation with Wilson, he's got 4 games in a row with at least 3 touchdowns. And last week it was against Jacksonville. So I feel pretty safe about his floor as well. Their running game is atrocious, and he's like their whole offense. Mm-hmm. But you guys have convinced me a little bit more on the GPP playability of Brady, especially if that ownership is under 10%. John, did you have any other QBs you wanted to mention? Any stretch GPP plays before we move on?
Maybe I'll just clean up a couple things. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Cam Newton. I think he's cash game playable this week. I know he's not as popular as some of the other guys we're talking about. He's had some pretty tough matchups over the past few weeks. New Orleans has a pretty decent secondary, and last week he went up against Minnesota, won that game last week in Minnesota on the heels of Jonathan Stewart, who did a lot of the heavy lifting for that team. This is a great situation for him against Green Bay for the reason we just talked about. Aaron Rodgers coming back. We know they're not going to lay an egg, so this should be back and forth. And I think Cam Newton has some upside there, and he's at 6,400 on DraftKings and 7,900 on FanDuel. I like the savings that he gives you because we're going to get to wide receivers in a minute, and I think the consensus will be, even though I haven't spoken to any of you about it, there's not a whole lot of value at that position this week. So if you're looking to save some money, that might be an area you can do it. The other thing I wanted to say earlier is the Nick Foles thing. I think I'm in a little bit of disagreement with regards to how Devin thinks he'll be rolled out this week. I'll be honest and say that I live in Philadelphia and I haven't heard either way. It's just my gut feeling. I think they're going to lean a bit more heavily on Jay Ajayi this week. They can beat this team with Jay Ajayi. The Giants have given up some massive yardage on the ground. There really is no reason to blow Foles' confidence. If he comes out here and throws 3 picks in his first game out in a game that they should win, that's a real issue. I think it's much better if they mix him in, get him into the playbook and do some good things, but not too much. So for that reason, I think Foles, if you're going to play him, only play him on FanDuel where he's 6,000. And for me, I'd limit my exposure even then.
Yeah, I like that min price over on FanDuel for sure. Better for Nick Foles. Let's talk about some running backs, guys. We got several injuries that we're watching here. Alvin Kamara looks like he's going to come back. I don't think he's cleared concussion protocol as of Thursday, but it sounds like he is going to in time for the game. Keep an eye on that. Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon both got limited practices on Thursday. It looks like Gio's good to go. I don't know about Joe Mixon yet. I think he's still in concussion protocol on Thursday, but may or may not get out of it. We're also looking at those Jets running backs. Matt Forte did not practice Thursday. Usually when he doesn't practice on Thursday, he's not going to go. And then Elijah McGuire got a limited practice on Thursday, so I don't think Bilal Powell is going to have this backfield all to himself. And then Damian Williams of the Dolphins practiced on Thursday. Keep an eye on that, and maybe it doesn't affect the Kenyan Drake hype train at all. But, you might want to keep an eye on that and keep your ear as to whether he's going to get any work this week. Let's talk running backs. Ryan, I'm going to go to you first and find out what running backs you like.
Yeah, there's obviously you can just start right at the top and think about Le'Veon Bell. I mean,
that was a hard one.
Yeah, well,
you're not going to throw up the red black guy Joe, Devin?
No.
I said obviously, and my sentence was over. moving down, but not much further down. I don't know why people are still like not just automatically considering Todd Gurley. I mean, maybe you guys are, but I still hear and read that, well, Todd Gurley, Seattle, tough matchup. Todd Gurley last week, Philly, tough matchup. The guy's getting more touches than anyone but Le'Veon Bell in the league, and he's still $1,000 cheaper or thereabouts.
There's couple key injuries there. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
Sure.
I think it's worth bringing up. Andrew Whitworth is hurt, and their other, I believe it's the right tackle. I've forgotten the name, but he's one of their better rush blockers as well. So there's two key injuries there on the offensive line. That
Whitworth's good to go, but the right tackle, I believe, is not likely to play. On the other side of the ball, though, let's talk about Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright being hurt, because that's a big deal. And John, I don't know if you're going there, but
yeah,
that's a huge deal.
Yeah,
a lot of injuries here, and I know we've kind of usurped your time there, Ryan. But go ahead and stop back in. It's important to point out these injuries because we're talking about key people that are going to affect the ability to run the ball one way or the other.
Very, very important stuff to talk about. And my only thing with Gurley is just that how many game script proof guys do you have up there other than Bell? I mean, I'm looking at DraftKings pricing. It's Bell, Kamara. I guess you could consider McCoy, but then you get into, you got Kamara, Ingram, and they're sharing, and then you've got Fournette, who was hurt and didn't practice this week, and how involved is he ever in the passing game? And so just if you have it and you really need that guy who is getting 20 touches and is getting 100 total yards, it's an installed floor. But aside from the obvious guys, I actually really like Samaje Perine this week. Devin's boy, Byron Marshall, got put on IR, just like every other Redskins running back has so far this year. And Arizona, I don't know. It just seems like they
shut down Tennessee last week.
And, I mean, I don't know. Tennessee's offense isn't really impressive to me. And Perine is going to be involved in the game. He's going to play most of the snaps. I think you could do worse for his price. So if you're looking for a mid-range / cheap guy, I like touches, and I think he's going to get them, and they're favored, and they're in a home game, and I just don't know how much Arizona has left in the tank.
Perine or Alex Collins?
Collins is also on my list. To me,
it's Collins is a no-brainer at 200 more.
So, but I like Perine as a potential GPP pivot because Collins is going to be so highly owned. The thing about Perine, I would only play him on DraftKings because he's way cheaper on DraftKings at 4,800 in relative pricing. I know he's not a big pass catching back, but 4,800 is kind of ridiculous for a guy who's going to get 20 touches. I don't know.
Cheap touches.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are going to reel off the rest of the guys in that price range. So, I like.
I think we're looking in the wrong price range. I think we're burying the lead here. The guy is Kenyan Drake. We got to get Kenyan Drake right at the top here on both sites. He's going to be in like 85% of the lineups this week.
Yeah.
He's not quite the Geo of the week, but he's got the guy that we're looking at most of the roster construction of a high-priced running back and a low-priced running back, and it's probably Drake or two cheap guys because the wide receivers cost a lot. I think that's really where we got to talk about.
Yeah, and I like Alex Collins a lot in cash as well. Like, I'm not looking at Perine for cash games. If you want salary relief this week, Drake and Collins pairing is a good savings there. Devin,
especially if Damian Williams is out.
Yeah.
If Damian Williams is out, just lock in Drake. Like, there might be a little hesitation in GPPs where you could fade Drake, and if Williams does play, because he's going to be so highly owned.
So Buzzard has him at 31% in GPPs. That's pretty high.
And I think that number could be a little bit low. Actually, I think that he's going to be by far one of the highest players of the year just because of his performance last 2 weeks, really. I'm going to go – yikes.
I'm going to get my red, black,
really
red ready.
He's going to say Isaiah Crowell. I know it.
Let's do this now.
Don't mention a Brown, please.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm going to say a running back $100 cheaper than Isaiah Crowell, and I'm going to go Kerwin Williams for the Cardinals. And the reason I say Kerwin Williams is that he's averaging 83 yards over his last two games. Adrian Peterson's out. This team really has nothing to play for. So they're trying to see what they have in Kerwin Williams. And at 4,000 on DraftKings, this Washington run defense really isn't that good. They started out the year good, but they allowed 174 yards rushing last week on 5 yards per attempt. They stopped Melvin Gordon, but Austin Eckler just basically tore them up with 50 yards on just 3 carries. Kerwin Williams has been getting big chunk plays. So as a GPP play, he's the guy I'm looking at. The guy I'm fading is actually Alvin Kamara. So I just don't know how they're going to integrate him with, yes, he's going to play, but do they need to play him? Like, for a concussion, if he gets a second one, he's done. It just seems like a spot where you don't need to play Kamara this week. So I wonder if they're going to limit his touches at all and just go with Ingram. So Ingram is a GPP target that I'm actually looking at.
I mean, I like Ingram as well, but I've faded Kamara too much, and I'm not going to count him out at all.
So now that you're switching back over, it's time to get off the train.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody off the Kamara train. No, I think that both of these backs could have big games in a situation where they're playing the Jets and Bryce Petty. Let's see. Who else hasn't talked about running backs? John, did you have some running backs?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I'll finish up. I'll say that, Devin, I agree with you on that take. It's something I brought up on the Roto Grinder show last night. I think Ingram is a guy that's, if they're smart down there in New Orleans, they just lean on him. They're 16-point favorites. So you don't need Kamara to do anything this week. Just give the ball to the guy who can lower his head and get the yardage and get the win. And save Kamara for when you need him. But, we'll see how it plays out, because I think that I was in the minority last night, and I'm sure that people are going to want to keep riding that train because he's been so effective. A guy I like this week is Mike Davis. Nobody mentioned him. He's still pretty cheap at $4,000, $5,800. He didn't have the week that we wanted last week, but he missed quite a bit of that game because he was injured. And because he missed that time, he didn't get the amount of carries and touches that we thought he would. This week, he looks like he'll be fine going up against the Rams, who have not defended the rush well all season, in a game that I think is going to be fairly fast-paced. Another thing we talked about on the Roto Grinder show last night. I think this game has sneaky it's already 47.5-point total, but I think it can actually surpass 50 points because of how quickly it can go. And then the last thing I wanted to say, touching back on that Kenyan Drake situation, Damian Williams practiced partially today. If he ends up being active, I'm going to come off of Kenyan Drake quite a bit, especially in GPPs, because of the success that we saw last week with Gio Bernard. Everybody's going to have that security that this is a cheap running back who's been getting a lot of volume, who's going to give me that 3x so that I can spend up elsewhere. And that recency bias is going to kick in. And if Damian Williams is there to steal any amount of time, I'm more than happy to back off of him in tournaments, because I think Kenyan Drake is not a guy that 3 weeks ago we would have been comfortable going 50% on. It's just because he had 2 very good weeks, one of which was against the worst rushing defense in the league in the form of the Patriots.
Yeah, Jeff, you flashed up some signs there. Did you want to add anything about, I think it was Mike Davis or another running back before we head to wide receivers?
It was just briefly on Mike Davis because of the ribs. I think he's practicing now, but I'd be watching. You got to watch all the injury reports of the running backs. Now, I agree with John. John, just back to you. If you're coming off of Drake, do you offer a pivot or you do reconstruct?
I mean, I think you just reconstruct in general.
Okay.
It's a way to build some uniqueness to your rosters as well, because a lot of people are going with him. For me, it's just a way to diversify, because a lot of people are going to be in that Geo mindset from last week that worked very well, and I'm not so sure it fits in this situation, because he's still 5,800 and 6,500. It's not quite the same.
Just take some AJP, Ryan, and save $1,000.
Can I interest you guys in Latavius Murray?
Yes, that's who I was going to talk about.
I mean, the Bengals' rush defense has basically imploded. Murray has done most of his damage in wins, so he didn't really have a great game last week, and that was largely because they were behind to the Panthers, where he only had 9 carries. But the 4 games before that, he had 16, 20, 15, and 17 carries, had 4 touchdowns in those 4 games. His price really isn't that bad, so Murray's a guy that I'm interested. pretty interested in him. He's cash. I don't know if he's cash viable, but at 4,900 on DraftKings, I think he's at least cash considerable this week.
Yeah, he's had in the last 5 games 4-4, 9-4, and then 1 in the Carolina game red zone opportunities. So, as an 11-point home favorite, I'll take a piece of that.
Yeah, I don't think he's quite cash viable for me, but I could see using him in GPPs. Wide receivers, we've got a few injuries we're looking at. Don't think Kelvin Benjamin's going to go this week with a knee injury. It looks like Robert Woods will be back this week from his shoulder injury. We're keeping an eye on Mike Wallace, who did not practice on Thursday. And then Juju Smith-Schuster was a late added on Thursday. Got a limited practice in, but he's got some hamstring issues going on, and we know those can be pretty tricky. So watch Juju Smith-Schuster's status against New England, because obviously people are going to be loading up on that high total game. Ryan, let's go to you first on wide receivers. Who do you have this week?
I'm going to skip the cash game plays, and maybe you guys might think this is a cash game play, but I'm going to go right back to Josh Gordon after we talked about it last week. He's going to be lower owned, right? I mean, everybody.
No.
No? Okay.
No, with Jimmy Smith and what Antonio Brown did,
so
I haven't looked at Buzzard's numbers, but he'll be popular.
All right,
Buzzard has him at 10% on DraftKings.
Oh, I'll take that all day. So the last 6 wide receiver ones, if you count Golden Tate and Marvin Jones both as wide receiver ones. So in the last 5 games, top wide receivers have averaged 7 catches, 115 yards against Baltimore. And they've allowed 5 pass plays of 30 yards or more in the last 6 quarters without Jimmy Smith, after allowing 8 all season prior to that. Josh Gordon can go deep. We don't have to wind concerns in Devin's empty notebook this week. And so I really like it coming back after a week that everybody loved him. And he had that huge first drive and then did almost nothing else. So maybe that leaves a little bit of a bad taste in people's mouths. But whether it does or doesn't, I think he's a very viable play this week.
I think we need to have that as a spin-off show next year, Devin's Empty Notebook. It's just Devin just like riffing for like half an hour.
I mean, that's what week 17 in the playoffs are going to be.
I like it. Welcome to Devin's Empty Notebook. I'm your host, and here's Ryan too.
So is there any concern about what happened last week? I honestly don't know. I didn't watch the film on this game. He had 2 targets in the first quarter, one of which was a touchdown, and then he didn't get a catch in the second half. What happened there? Did they change scheme? Did they double cover? Is it something this new defense is going to try to emulate? Any concern there? I don't know the answer, by the way. I'm asking an honest question.
I don't know the answer either.
Was it that the Green Bay, second-year corner actually had a pretty solid game covering Gordon? Wasn't that part of it? Like, it was a little surprising that he had as good a game against Gordon as he did.
Yeah, Demarius Randall had a pretty good game in coverage. They went to Corey Coleman a lot, so Corey Coleman's another guy that one of these 2 receivers will have a big game. So, which one it is, I think it's Gordon, but I wouldn't be surprised, especially if they put Brandon Carr. Right now, it looks like Brandon Carr is going to be on Josh Gordon. Brandon Carr is the worst corner in Baltimore, where Marlon Humphreys, the rookie, is going to be on Coleman. So if that switches, it could totally be a Coleman game, and they just say, hey, we're going to put our top corner. Humphrey's a big corner, so it may make sense to do that, but you would switch sides of the field, which, for a rookie, I don't know how much they're going to do that. So one of these 2 receivers will have a big game. I think it's Gordon, but it very, very easily could be Coleman.
Yeah, I definitely lean towards Gordon in that situation, but only for GPPs. John, lay out some of the cash game plays for us this week.
Antonio Brown, anybody? If you're gonna pay,
he's all right.
Easy.
He's he's pretty expensive. 9,100 DraftKings, 9,300 FanDuel, but he's the guy that you got to be looking at, especially if the game plays out the way we talked about earlier. Adam Thielen against Cincinnati, $7,600 on both sites. Cincinnati's been pretty banged up in their secondary, giving up some decent games there. I'm not exactly sure where they're at with the injury report this week, but if Kirkpatrick is out and Jones is out again, or if they're hobbled, definitely Thielen is a guy that you can be looking at. And I should point out they have been beaten up on the inside by slot receivers this season. So actually, neither one of those guys he's going to see a lot of anyhow. Outside of that, Devin Funchess, anybody? He's another guy, goes up against the same Green Bay secondary. Pretty cheap, 6,600, 7,300. And then, some of the other common guys we're always looking at, Michael Thomas against the Jets and Doug Baldwin against the Rams are the other guys that are kind of on my cash game list. That said, you got to find some value this week, and I'll be interested to hear what you guys are thinking in terms of value, because it's if you're going to spend up on a guy like Le'Veon and then probably go to Kenyan Drake, you're going to end up with about an average of $6,000 to $7,000 per player. You're eventually going to have to take a chance this week on a receiver, whether it be a tight end or a wide receiver. And for me, the one guy is Damiere Byrd, who's seeing increased looks across on the other side of the field for Carolina. Devin's laughing. I'm just going to say a few things, and then I'll let him.
I know he's fast. He went to South Carolina, but
he's super fast. He's like a 4.27 40. Amazing. He's got like a 42-inch vertical leap, and they're working him into the offense. He went from 20% to 40% to 60%. Russell Shepard is getting less looks every week, and this is a team that can be beaten deep. So he needs one play to reach value for you at $3,000 on DraftKings and $4,500 on FanDuel.
All right, Devin, tell us why that's a terrible idea.
I mean, it's not a terrible idea. He's just playing the Curtis Samuel role, and like Curtis Samuel had before. I mean, his best game was the game that he got hurt. As a GPP play, if you want to take him, but I think John was inferring he's cash viable, which there's no way. Can't say that word, but there's no chance he's cash viable. I mean, he could be a zero. He could get you a zero very easily.
I agree with that. So, but where are you saving money? That's the question.
On DraftKings?
Yeah.
DeShone Kizer.
So quarterback.
So you're going to run DeShone Kizer out as your quarterback this week in cash games.
Yes, sir.
Sounds viable.
I mean, I'm definitely playing at least one cheap running back, but I think that's sort of a given this week. I'm considering two cheap running backs and fading Bell and Cash, which sounds a little crazy, but I can't find the usual value I have at the other positions.
Can we talk about New England and Pittsburgh?
Sure.
Like, we've talked about Brady, we've talked about Bell, we've talked about Brown. If I'm listening to the show, I'm very confused. I don't know which route to go. And that's what I want to – for me, it's – I don't pay up at quarterback because I want at least one, if not two of those guys on, try and fit them in some way, somehow. I want to get you guys' thoughts on what you're doing with that game.
I think that you're going to choose between Brown and Bell in your lineup. I don't think you're going to get both of them on a week where the salary is tight. So for me, the question is, which of those two do you take? Why don't we do Black Eye Joes? In cash, who would you rather have? If you want Bell in your cash game, hold up the green. If you want Brown in your cash game, hold up the red. So I'm probably going Brown. But we've got – so me and Ryan did Brown, Devin and John did green, and we're going to go to Jeff for his take on it.
I think it's slate specific. I think I'm going to go with Bell on FanDuel. And I think I'm going to go with Brown on DraftKings because Bell's going to see, I think, less targets because Juju's going to be in the mix. And that's the way I'm thinking. And it's going to be harder for them to reach value. His price is so high on DraftKings to hit that 3X plus that I want for cash/tournament a little bit more. So I'm going to Bell on FanDuel and Brown on DraftKings.
And I'm not really looking at any other Steelers or Patriots for cash
not
game.
Juju?
Not for cash game, I don't think. I mean, I guess you could go Juju if he's healthy and playing.
If you're looking to save a wide receiver and you're looking to get a piece of the biggest game,
that's
he's only
fair.
5,400 on DraftKings.
That's fair. No, that's fair. I've got him on my cash game list too. I just noticed he's the last guy on my list.
Is he better than Chris Hogan for 100 more?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I'd say without the hammy, Sure, agreed. But I'm
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
I think the issue with the Patriots playmakers is that it's a little fuzzy as to who's going to get the work. You could maybe say Rex Burkhead, but he's pretty touchdown dependent. That makes me a little bit nervous.
The safest play is Brady in that game if you're going to want to try and get a piece and give the majority of the piece there.
Yeah. All right. Any other receivers before we move on to tight ends here?
Yes.
Okay, hit me.
I do. Why? I know the matchup isn't very good, but why is everybody just so dismissive of AJ Green for $100 cheaper than Devin Funchess? In the last 4 games that each have played, AJ Green hasn't seen fewer than 9 targets, and Devin Funchess has seen more than 7 targets one time. I know they're not high-value targets against Xavier Rhodes, but they're going to be passing. They're going to be behind. It's AJ Green. It's Devin Funchess. It's at least making me think. I guess doesn't make John think at all, but it's making me think.
John, is it the Xavier Rhodes factor?
It's the Xavier Rhodes factor. Outside of that game in Thanksgiving when he got toasted for Marvin Jones, I think the most yardage he's given up, I'm looking at his shadow results this season, the most yards he's given up in any game this season is 54 yards to Antonio Brown back in week number 2. Outside of that, it was 36, 4, 21, 26, 22. 26 most recently was Julio Jones. I just don't trust it. I don't think you can do it.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think if you're going to play a receiver in a tough matchup, I think looking at DeAndre Hopkins might be a guy that will probably have lower ownership this week, sort of in that same category.
You're going to pay $1,200 more for him with TJ Yates against Jacksonville than you would for AJ Green?
Yeah.
Targets.
Plus, Buzzard has him lower owned than AJ Green. He thinks AJ Green's going to be 9% owned and Hopkins 5% owned.
Do you really want to trust Andy Dalton with your hard-earned money?
You want
That's the philosophy.
Do you want to trust TJ Yates against Jacksonville?
No,
Wait,
but
He
who's-
scored 7 points at home last week.
Who's won
I
more
trust-
playoff games?
Yeah, that's true. Who Yates beat Dalton in a playoff game, if you remember.
Game over.
Boom!
If I can
by
get
that
15
logic-
targets, I'll take that every day of the week. I don't care who's defending it.
All right.
All right, I want to throw something out here because I want to go back to what Devin was saying with respect to Deshaun Kaiser. So I'm building a lineup on our interactive value charts as we go through it. Deshaun Kaiser, Kenyan Drake, Todd Gurley, who's not the most expensive guy, and Antonio Brown. So those 4 as anchors for cash game with the Jacksonville Jaguars. That leaves me with 4 positions and an average of $4,300 per player left. I'm not being extravagant there. I don't think I am. And so what I'm bringing this up for is I think you really need a value wide receiver. And if you don't have one now, I'm asking you to have one by the end of the show, because I guarantee you on Sunday morning when our people are looking for making up the rosters, they're going to want a value wide receiver because there just isn't many this week. Or aren't
Dede Westbrook,
That's
Yes. Why hasn't he been
5,700,
mentioned
right?
yet?
5,100.
That's still above the 4,300 I just said.
Well,
Right, but you take the Dolphins at the defense against the Bills, and you're that's up to what, 46, 40, 45 average?
Let me do that quickly. Who'd you say, the Dolphins?
Yeah,
All right, so
and then go 3K at tight end. It starts to climb pretty
Who?
quickly.
Yeah.
If you go
we got to talk about who that's
Charles
going to
Clay.
be.
Charles
Charles
Clay,
Clay.
yeah.
All right, now that leaves me with about 5,300, 5,400 per. So you can go with Dede Westbrook, but there's got to be 2 other guys that are that good in
Sharp
that
Matthews.
same situation.
All right, let's go
All
to
right.
Jeff. Jeff's got some cheap
go ahead.
receivers for you.
All right, cheaper wide receiver. I mentioned Juju. If he's healthy, I'm putting him in at 5,400. We mentioned Dede at 5,100. Marquise Goodwin's at 6. I know we're a little bit higher than that, but I think that he's reasonable as a value play. And you got to look at Green Bay. Jordy Nelson at 6,300 is a bargain with Aaron Rodgers. So I'm looking. I get what you're saying, John, but I'm looking at more of a balanced roster, and I'm looking at 2 cheap running backs rather than going up at 1 running back. That's where I'm constructing for cash on DraftKings.
Yeah, the Drake Collins pairing frees up the cash that I need at receiver. I don't love fading the big running backs, but it's a real struggle to find cheap receivers.
Mike Wallace.
If he's healthy, I don't hate that call, but we just got to watch his health. and make sure that he comes through. That's a guy I have my eye on as well. All right, we've covered a lot of receivers. I agree with you, John. We didn't cover those cheap receivers real well, so if someone saves one for parting thoughts and thinks of another one, that would be a great fill-in. Let's talk tight ends. Looks like Zach Ertz actually cleared concussion protocol this week and will play. Kyle Rudolph was in a walking boot this week, didn't practice Thursday. I don't think he's going to go, but there's not really a guy in Minnesota you care about filling in for him. Jimmy Graham did not practice on Thursday with an ankle injury. Jordan Reed is out of the picture officially. We don't have to talk about him anymore because he's on IR finally. Let's see here. Devin, what do you think about Zach Ertz at 6,000 on DraftKings?
It's really cheap. It is really cheap. So I think Ertz is a great play on DraftKings. FanDuel not so much. He's at 7,900. But I think that, I strongly believe that they are going to want Foles to get comfortable with this offense. Who knows how much he's been practicing with the number one team. I think that they're going to want to do everything that they can to get him comfortable with Jeffrey, with Ertz, with maybe even Aguilar. So I think that Ertz is going to get a significant number of targets in this game. A guy that's pretty intriguing, and it's a little bit narrative street, is Ben Watson against Cleveland. So Cleveland has really struggled against tight ends. Watson going against his former team didn't really have a great exit in Cleveland, and Cleveland's been struggling against tight ends this year. So if you're going to go cheap, Watson's a name to consider.
Yeah, that's a good call. Does anyone really exit Cleveland cleanly? I don't know.
Not really.
Just usually with staff.
Some people are really happy.
Yeah. Most of the time they actually sign a big deal like Alex Mack or Mitchell Schwartz or Deshaun Gibson and just get out. But Watson was a little bit of an interesting case.
Yeah. Let's see. Jeff, hit me with did you like that Charles Clay pick? 3,000 on DK. That seems like a good value.
It does seem like a good value. Weather permitting, we got to watch weather, of course. But I think that, he could sit. And again, he's assuming Tyrod to go. But I think that's definitely a good, solid option there. I think that's probably the best value play. I also think Jimmy Graham's way too cheap at 4,900. I think that's a mid-range target that I'm looking at. And if you're not playing Russ Wilson in your cash game, it's a good way to get exposure to it.
Yep, I think if Jimmy Graham plays, he's a good price point for sure. John, who are you playing at tight end this week?
Yeah, I think we've talked about most of them. I do like Charles Clay as well. He's not done a whole lot, which is a little bit scary. Recently, he hasn't been that integrated into the offense. But this matchup against Miami is pretty good. They're 29th DVOA against tight ends. Using your normalized strength of schedule, they're allowing 22% more fantasy points to opposing tight ends after normalization for strength of schedule. I think it's a really good spot to save some money this week. Outside of that, I think Ertz is the guy that I want to pay up for. I don't want to go the whole way to Gronk for all the reasons we've already talked about, but Jimmy Graham is also another guy who I like, and that's kind of where I'm staying.
I can't believe you guys haven't mentioned Delaney Walker.
Yeah, that's a good one. He's on my list.
First game back in San Francisco since he left the team. 49ers have allowed, let's see, 5 touchdowns to tight ends in the last 5 games. Walker is, yes, Marcus Mariota is terrible, and I said it 6 weeks ago that Blake Bortles is better than Marcus Mariota. I stand by that. But Delaney Walker is a guy who's just consistent. So at 5,200 on DraftKings and on FanDuel, he's 6,500. He's relatively cheap, and he's a guy who should be at least considered for cash because his floor is so high.
Yeah. Yep. All right. We're going to move on to defenses and kickers unless anyone's got any more tight end stuff. All right.
One more.
Okay.
I think Greg,
Jeff's got one more.
Greg Olsen has to be mentioned.
Come on.
If we like – yes.
Are you just looking at the name or are you looking at game logs? He hasn't been involved at all.
He's been hurt.
He was out.
But he's still hurt.
He was on 92% of the snaps last week. It was we don't
target.
like the Green Bay secondary. Okay. I think he's a valuable GPP play for
Let the man talk. Let's hear.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
He He's 4,000. He's a Pro Bowler for 4,000. He was on 92% of the snaps last week. And Cam Newton, we like Cam Newton against the Green Bay defense.
I agree with all of that. I agree with that last part. I'm not so sure I like Greg Olsen. Devin's right. He's just not being used. I wonder if he's just kind of out there to end the season and, reboot for 2018. It's really tough for me to get behind him the way that they did not use him last week.
My question is, why are they playing him?
Yeah, I agree.
They're going to the playoffs. Like, why are they doing this?
Yeah, I want to see him play a healthy
understand.
game before I get back on that train
What's
for
the
DFS.
point? Just save him for the playoff. I don't understand it.
He doesn't seem quite right. But if you think this is a game where he is right, then that could be a good GPP play.
We always talk about not wanting to play players in fantasy after a long layoff. So if they just save him for the playoffs, having never played him before the playoffs, he's going to come out super rusty. So perhaps they're playing him to tune him up for the playoffs. And I don't know that I like Olsen as much of a play this week, but Greg Olsen is a little bit of the reason I was semi-down on Devin Funchess earlier, as decried as that was by this group. What if he gets 4 targets? That's 4 targets that Devin Funchess might not get. So that to me is the bigger deal with Greg Olsen than actually thinking about playing.
How he might actually steal work from the guys that we are sort of more heavily considering.
He still played 92% of the snaps, and Cam Newton still likes him. I mean, he
only had 1 target. Like, that just doesn't even – that math doesn't even –
It was a weird game script with James Stewart getting 3 touchdowns. It was a very weird game.
When does Jonathan Stewart – does he have 100 yards all year before that game? I mean, I know he does, but I think you guys know what I mean. It was super weird. Minnesota, for instance, has had 7 games since Dalvin Cook got hurt that both of their running backs had double-digit carries, and last week was the first time that neither of them did. It was a weird game for both teams. Nobody thought Carolina was going to be winning that game the whole time. If they're in a shootout, if they're a little bit behind, his targets go from maybe to 5. I'm not saying he's going to get 10 targets and he's a lock, but he's not going to get 1.
The game before, where he played only 24 snaps, he had 4 targets. So 7 to 8 targets is within reason on a normal game script, I believe.
All right, guys, we got to move on to defenses and kickers. Jeff, I want you to give me the 1-minute rundown on your 3 favorite defenses and your 3 favorite kickers.
Saints, Jags, Vikings are the top 3 defenses. They're very highly owned, very great spots, double-digit favorites. Those are the 3 teams you want to get in. Jaguars, especially if you can afford them. I think the Ravens are in a decent spot, but I really don't trust them. I think that's a bad GPP because I think the Cleveland can actually get their first win. I like the Eagles against the Giants. I think they're going to be really stepping up to try and save Nick Foles and protect their entire environment there. Kickers, Will Lutz is probably my top guy. Best way to get exposure to the Saints. I think Robbie Gould is viable, and I think Kai Forbath is viable as a cheap option.
Yep, I like the Forbath on the cheap and Lutz on the expensive. Those are good calls. Let's talk about stacks. And you know what? FanDuel introduced a new format this week that's kind of exciting. We're not going to get a ton into it, but they introduced the SuperFlex, where you could potentially double stack. We haven't prepared a lot of double stack material here, but if you want to give that new format a try, it looks like a lot of fun. No kickers, no defenses. And you can play 2 quarterbacks. And John loves the no kickers.
And no defenses.
And the no defenses, considering the number of times he's been burned by those. And the double quarterbacks harkens back to sites of olden days where you used to be able to play 2 quarterbacks at Draft Street or Fantasy Aces. I act like Fantasy Aces was 10 years ago. It was like last year. But, I'm glad to have a 2 quarterback option back. So, stacks. John, who are you stacking this week?
Game strategy, going away from that Pittsburgh New England game, which quite frankly may not be smart, but it's kind of obvious what to do there. But I like Case Keenum in a bounce back game this week with Adam Thielen. I've talked earlier about how slot receivers have performed against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals, if you look at their game logs, their defensive game logs over the past 6 weeks, they've allowed 6 consecutive quarterbacks to throw for 250 yards or more. And those quarterbacks include Trubisky, Kaiser, Osweiler, Mariota, Bortles.
A murderer's row of quarterbacks is what you're saying.
And you've got Case Keenum, who over the past 6 weeks has thrown for 280 yards or more 5 times out of 6. And on the 6th occasion, he threw for a pair of touchdowns and 250 yards. So I think this is a great spot for him to bounce back. And I think because of recency bias and all the attention on that Seattle, Los Angeles, or New England, Pittsburgh game, he's going to be under-owned.
Yep, I like it. Devin, who do you got in your stacks this week?
Blake Bortles and Dede Westbrook. So Blake Bortles going up against a secondary that he should be. I mean, the only concern in this game is that they get up through defensive touchdowns or some other reasoning. But the Houston secondary has been the worst. Has allowed the most 300-yard games. 6 of the last 11 have actually thrown for over 300 yards. Bortles it looks like they're trying to trust him a little bit more. He threw for 309 against the Colts and 268 against the Seahawks last week. The other stack I've mentioned like 10 times this show is Kaiser and either Coleman or Gordon.
Gotcha. Ryan, who are you stacking this week?
Going back to the FanDuel thing with the SuperFlex, it's super exciting because you can do a lineup. I did one earlier. It's super loaded on the Pittsburgh New England game. You can fit Brady and Roethlisberger and Brown and Gronkowski and Rex Burkhead. And then I have 3 spots left for guys like I've mentioned Samaje Perine this show, Paul Richardson, who's a low end wide receiver. And then I still have 5,400 left. So you can, looking at that 5,400, you could fit in, Kendall Wright got a ton of targets last week. You might not like him. Tyler Lockett would fit in there. O.J. Howard would fit in there. We talked Charles Clay. I mean, there's a lot of options still left. So you can stack this entire game and still get a guy who will get you maybe, 10 points on a close to minimum price if you wanted to go that route. So it's a lot of fun to be able to just find a game you like and absolutely nail it from both sides. So I'm excited about that new format. And the other correlation play that I like, only because I didn't get a chance to mention the defense here, is Perine and the Washington defense. Arizona lost 2 offensive linemen last week who I don't think will be playing this week. So I always like finding offenses who are losing linemen and transitioning into new ones in their first game. And Washington can really get after the passer. They were after it against the Chargers last week, who haven't given up a lot of sacks all year, and Washington had a couple in that game. Granted, they got crushed, but I don't think Arizona's going to do what Phillip Rivers and company did to them. So I like that defense as well. And those are my correlation plays.
Nice. And it's interesting because I think it was at a 2QB finals that Jeff and John met Devin and roped him into this whole Football Guys mess. So it's kind of ironic.
They're regretting that ever since.
It's come full circle. Yeah, exactly. Ryan, red, black eyed Joe on that. So for that 2 quarterback format, one of the first lineups I built was a Nick Foles stacked with Ertz and Case Keenum stacked with Thielen. Both quarterbacks should be lower owned than some of these higher profile games, but I highly recommend you double stack your GPPs in this format. You don't want to just be like, I'll just do 1 quarterback. 2 quarterbacks in GPPs in this format.
If you like New England, Pittsburgh, just start playing it next week because everyone is going to be on it. The only way to play it really is to avoid that game.
Yeah. Jeff, I think you're the last person on stacks.
I'll give a quick mention to 2 that I like that were mentioned earlier, just for honorable mention. I think Garoppolo to Marcus Goodwin is a good one. Kaiser to Josh Gordon is a good one. But the one I like that I don't think we even mentioned Jared Goff, but I think that's a game that could be in a shootout. And Jared Goff to Todd Gurley. I think that's a stack that won't be highly owned. It's a pivot off of Le'Veon Bell. It'll be very low. And Goff is going to be low owned already. Both those guys can produce in shootouts. And you can run it back with Jimmy Graham if you wanted to. But I think that's the most viable option from that game to get a piece of both sides. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think Goff is a great TP play this week.
Yeah, and Steve Buzzard's ownership projections over at footballguys.com/DFS only have Goff at 2% ownership projection. So I like your game theory play there, Jeff. Let's see. We're at Parting Thoughts, fellas. Another fun show. Let's wrap up with some final thoughts or cheap receivers that you might have thought of as we went through the show. Let's see. John, I was going to make a joke about you being the sage, wise, old veteran.
He's just old.
But I won't. No, he's also a veteran. Tell me, what advice do you have for people this week, week 15?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot of stuff, a lot of ground in this episode. The one thing I'll say is, why don't you head over to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment there. The guys, myself included, we try to get in there and answer questions throughout the rest of the week. So, you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, they didn't talk about this player, or I really want to know who that low-owned guy that they didn't mention or didn't get a chance to mention. So anything like that, stop in there, drop a little comment in the box, and Austin, Devin, Ryan, Jeff, myself, somebody will get back with you. I can almost assure you, because it's been pretty active most of the season, and would love to kind of wrap that up with more people as the season ends.
That's great. A great point. Devin and John, I think, are especially good about getting in there and answering people's questions on the YouTube comments. Devin, what are your parting thoughts?
Yeah, so I've been building a DraftKings lineup for most of the show.
I thought that's what you were doing there. I was wondering.
That's why I've been quiet for this moment. Deshaun Kaiser, Le'Veon Bell, Kenyan Drake, Antonio Brown, Mike Wallace if he's healthy, Dede Westbrook, Charles Clay, Alex Collins, Miami Dolphins.
That Miami one is the one that makes me a little nervous, but you got some.
Nathan Peterman.
Is it though? I mean, I think Tyrod's probably going to go in this game, and even if he doesn't, McCoy could have another big game.
They look good though. They looked really good against the Patriots.
But if you're going to punt, I'm okay with punting at defense. So at least we agree on that.
Fair.
That's fair. No, and I agree with that. Okay, cool. Jeff, parting thoughts.
Okay, a couple of things. We covered a lot of ground this week. It's been a good show, but I think that you don't want to miss out on SuperFlex, having done well in 2 quarterback leagues before. A lot of us have. Game stack. If you love a game, get both quarterbacks, pick receivers on both sides. You're really putting your eggs in a basket of one game to be a shootout. And if that happens, you get all the pieces pretty much there to be that much further ahead of the pack. Another good way to play that, if you play in the New England-Pittsburgh game, try the ground game on New England. Pick Rex Burkhead, pick Deion Lewis. Both are viable. They're going to be less owned this week, but it's still viable option to hit the end zone. Lastly, 3 wide receivers that are under $4,500 that have had 18 or more targets the last 3 weeks. Nelson Aguilar for $4,400, Corey Coleman for $4,400, and Brandon LaFell for $3,400.
Nice. That was good. Dropping the knowledge. I love it, Pasquino. Nicely done. Ryan, wrap us up here with your parting thoughts.
I touched on this in my trend spotting column this week, but kind of taking us full circle back to the top of the show where John mentioned all the big double-digit home favorites, and we talked about running backs and defenses as it's natural to do in that kind of projected script. But in order for the game to get out of hand, quarterbacks have to do pretty well too sometimes. So I don't think we talked about Drew Brees. So I'm not afraid to play Drew Brees in any format. His price is right there with Cam Newton and some other guys in that mid-6 range. I'm not afraid to put him out there even in cash. He may not have a high ceiling because the Jets aren't going to go back and forth, but he's got a touchdown or 2 in him. I mean, the New Orleans over the last 4 weeks is the 4th highest rate of neutral script that's within 7 points either direction passing, and the Jets are the 9th highest defensive rate in that game situation in terms of pass rates. So yeah, it might not be within 7 points for a long time, but first half, third quarter, I mean, they're still going to throw on occasion, and the Jets are horrible against the pass. And the other one for that is don't be afraid to play Blake Bortles. I mean, Devin mentioned him. The price is right, the matchup's right. It's not going to all be defense and running back. So we've seen it with Tom Brady.
It could be.
You're right. It could be, but it's not guaranteed to be, and that's the point. And we've seen it with Tom Brady, and certainly I'm not saying Blake Bortles is Tom Brady. Drew Brees is a little bit closer, but in games where New England's favored by double digits, Brady tends to have great games at times. So don't forget about these guys just because we expect running back and defense.
Yep, that's a great point. Try to think outside the box a little bit. We've got a lot of exciting things over at footballguys.com/DFS. One is Moral Tremblay, who puts together our lineup building tools, the IVCs, as we call them, the interactive value charts. He has put together one for SuperFlex for FanDuel. So if you want that specific game setup, please use that lineup builder over there. It has different pricing than the rest of the regular sort of game slate setup. So we've got a special one for that.
Please go check that out. He hasn't slept in about 3 days trying to put that thing together on the fly. So go and check that out and make sure you share him some love.
Yeah. I think he's at Moral on Twitter. He's not real active on Twitter, but you can find him and show him some love there. Also, we've got 3 free articles this week to, just try us out and maybe think about signing up for our subscription next season. We've got Exposed by Aaron Rodgers that sort of covers wide receiver and tight end matchups that are interesting this week. We've also got 2 DraftKings GPP articles to kind of coincide with the DraftKings Live Finals that's happening this weekend. We've got a Stacks article by John Mamula, and then we've also got a GPP domination article by Phil Alexander. So go check those out over at footballguys.com/DFS. Thank you for listening. Thanks for laughing with us and enjoying our fun time of trying to figure out what our lineups are going to be this week. And on behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, Ryan Hester, and Jeff Pasquino, I am Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out all of our DFS content over at footballguys.com, click on the icon in front of Ryan's face. To subscribe to our Football Guys TV YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click below me now.